Hello and welcome to this presentation on the physics of energy healing. Hi, I am Dr. Arlen Cage. Thank you for joining us. We're going to be talking about what's listed here in the agenda, different theories of healing from a more conventional medical standpoint as well as an energy medicine standpoint. What exactly is a human organism? We'll talk about our energy anatomy. We're going to talk about classical and modern physics and what the difference is. And then we'll get into a very serious approach to energy medicine. I found this quote online a while back, and it's very appropriate. It really nicely summarizes what the problems are when we try to introduce energy medicine into modern scientific medical discourse. Energy healing is about as popular today with academia as telescopes were 400 years ago with priests. There's a whole history about the problems Galileo ran into when he invented the telescope, and the church wouldn't listen to him when he said there were moons going around Jupiter. And that's just the tip of the iceberg on that issue. But that's the issue we face. I've run into this myself, people saying that energy, or the most common term comes from Chinese medicine, qi, that qi doesn't exist because qi doesn't exist. Not exactly a hallmark of scientific method, is it? So conventional medicine, modern Western medicine, and the academic world of biological sciences views healing like this. Molecules that come from foods or drugs or herbs or supplements, etc., enter the body, are distributed through the bloodstream following the principles of pharmacology. Those molecules in turn are absorbed into organs and tissues and exert a healing effect, or what's known as a mechanism action. And molecules usually get in by being eaten orally and absorbed into the bloodstream from the small intestine. Absorbed through the very thin layer of skin under the tongue. The sublingual route is another method. And we have intramuscular injections, subcutaneous injections, and so forth. And in that model, it doesn't matter how they get in, but it's the molecules being circulated and having an effect before they can be cleared. And that's how healing happens. In the conventional medical world, if we don't introduce molecules, then healing can't happen. Energy medicine, however, we have a different model. Energy medicine is a very broad term to describe methods of healing that don't work by delivering any molecules to the patient. This includes methods such as acupuncture or homeopathy, qigong, and many other similar modalities. So that leads to the question, if the answer for how energy medicine works is not molecules, then how does it work? What is its mechanism of action? Does energy medicine do anything other than induce a placebo effect? Is energy medicine even real? Those are some of the more academically oriented questions that come up, and they're often viewed as thinking, oh, well, a placebo effect is a bad thing. The patient got better. So the name energy medicine, however, implies that something happened that was a stimulus, that an energy transfer is taking place, and that energy transfer is resulting in a healing effect. One of the underlying principles in the universe is the principle of vibration. There's an ancient spiritual and scientific text called the Kabbalion, which says nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. Now, this ancient principle is soundly verified by modern physics, which has documented the reality that all matter is composed of vibrating subatomic particles and that energy and matter are equivalent. One of the things that ancient text says is to change your mood, change your vibration. You can change your mental vibration by an effort of your willpower in the direction of deliberately fixing the attention on a more desirable state. Your will direct your attention, and your attention changes your vibration. The masters also apply this principle to the conquering of natural phenomena. He who understands the principle of vibration has grasped the scepter of power. So now we get to the point where we're going to talk about what is a human being, and specifically human development. Biological evolution says that human beings evolved over time from simpler creatures. In essence, we go from being a worm to a worm with fancy flippers to a worm that has a spinal cord with fancy flippers, and gradually developing more sophisticated sense organs and more sophisticated flippers to help us move through the muck and do a better job of finding food and avoiding other creatures that want to eat us. There is a great deal of evidence that says in the fossil record these things have taken place. Something along this line may have occurred. It appears to definitely have occurred. The question, however, becomes, is that the whole story? There are various spiritual philosophies in the world that have a different opinion. This opinion is very, very briefly summarized as follows. The universe consists of more than just the physical world that is visible to our naked eye. There are, in fact, many layers of unseen planes of existence that are separated from this one by frequency. We have a level of our consciousness that is based on each of those higher frequency planes. That consciousness resides in a structure that are called energy bodies, and we have one for each of these other planes. And that means that the human organism is a multidimensional, highly complex series of energy waveforms and information repositories that overlap, and that the lowest frequency one of these has merged with a biological entity that serves as a host for the higher vibrating entity during the lifetime of the physical entity. And understanding this very complex relationship is the key to understanding energy medicine. When we examine healing and medical models from around the world, one such place that we turn to is the country of India. And the Ayurvedic medical theory they have describes a multi-layer auric field around all individuals. Back in 1939, a Soviet scientist named Semyon Kurlian discovered that objects and people who were exposed to high voltage field and photographed revealed coronal-like discharges around them, not otherwise visible in conventional photography. So this was apparently a way of looking into these auras. The different layers, the colors of auras in this image correspond to different layers of our energy bodies. The other way, of course, that this can happen is through your own continued work with energy methods such as Qigong and developing the skills to see or sense these fields directly. There is actually some additional scientific evidence besides Kirlian photography that shows that these kinds of phenomena actually take place. Kyoto University and the Tohoku Institute of Technology in Japan did some tests, and they found that the human body emits visible light at levels that are 1,000 times lower than that normally detected by the human eye. So the photo on the left is a normal visible light photograph. The picture on the far right is the same test subject photographed in infrared or heat photography. The one in the middle is a time-lapse photography of visible light that has not been caused by illuminating this test subject with an outside light source. So darkened room, set up a camera, do a time-lapse photograph, and that's what is seen. So here we have the body emitting visible light. Part of the information that's been gathered over the years shows that the human organism, what we think of as a human being, the human body, and the physical level, exists as something that is congregated around a long central standing columnar wave, a three-dimensional wave. This would be very much like the standing waves that occur in pipe organs, an organ pipe. There are, along that standing wave at the antinodes, the point where you see between, where the waveform crosses each other, there are 12, and in some cases, some people claim it's 13, what are known as chakras or energy centers or energy vortices. Mostly we hear about 7, which are located in the physical body. Well, we also have more that are outside the physical body, which is what we try to show here. And these chakras are serving as energy transformers between the background field of energy in the universe and the physical body. Additionally, chakras aren't just the energy centers in the central tube, which is somewhere roughly the center of our bodies. There is a vortex that opens to both the front and the rear on each of these different chakras. And each chakra has slightly different functions that it supports in the body. The details of all that are far beyond what we have time to cover in this video. Hit us up, and if you're interested in that, we can go into it more depth at a separate time. The openings are perhaps most fully described by the Taoist style of Qigong. There is 2 broad categories, Neidan and Weidan. Weidan is called the external elixir, and there's an internal elixir called the Neidan, and it's the Neidan category of internal elixir Qigong that makes most use of these for developing our internal energy. Next, I want to talk about the meridian system. These are pathways that exist in the planes of connective tissue. Connective tissue, it turns out, is semiconducting and behaves very much like a semiconductor chip in a computer, only this is a living computer in our bodies. And the energy that enters the chakra system then is routed into the meridian system, and eventually it connects to every organ and every cell in our body. So there's 12 major meridians and a number of other minor meridians, 6 that are yin and 6 that are yang. Yin and yang are the 2 opposite polarities of energy in the universe. And so this is the next level of information we need to know if we're going to be doing anything with energy medicine. So here is a chart where I've tried to graphically show how all this ties together. There is a background field of energy in the universe, universal background field, the quantum field, the chi field are all names that are ascribed to it. And we're going to learn a little bit more about that later on in this presentation. But quantum physics and Oriental medical philosophy both describe this background field of energy. Ayurvedic medical theory from India does the best, most complete job of describing the chakra system. There are 12 levels, so these are each concentric chakra is acting like step-down transformers to convert this background field energy down to a voltage level that's compatible with our physical bodies. It then enters the meridian system and connects to the organs, the energetic part of our organs. And that part of this theory is most accurately described in the Chinese medical system. The physical organs, getting down to cells, DNA, and how DNA alters our functions, that is most completely described by Western biological sciences, primarily because it was Western science that discovered the microscope. Chinese science did not. So now we're at a point where I want to make a quick summary of the terrain or the environment that's needed for energy medicine. You need to understand the basics of anatomy, both physical anatomy and energetic anatomy. You need to know that energy healing is about frequency as well as about power, and frequency also includes the concept of information. It is really important to understand the basics of physics principles and terms such as frequency, vibration, interference, diffraction, wavelength, and wave speed. And you will also need to become a student of physics and a student of energy if your goal is to be an effective energy healer. I say these things you need to know. You have to understand, please, that I've got about 37 years experience between healing and energy use in martial arts and medicine, and this is what I have seen be effective in that 37-year period. This brings us up to a discussion about physics. So the term classical physics applies to a period from roughly 1600 to 1900 and was mainly started by Galileo's introduction of measurements into scientific investigation. The most prominent individual in that time frame was Isaac Newton. The key successes of classical physics, which is sometimes also known as Newtonian physics, that all natural forces we had observed up to that point were found to follow from a combination of just two fundamental forces, gravitation and electromagnetism. So things like wind, heat, cold, lightning, electricity, motion, forces, vectors, water flow, the motion of the stars and planets, magnets, fire, and on and on and on, all were described by gravitation and electromagnetism. Yes, as the title says, oops. Upon further review, after all the successes it had demonstrated, Newtonian physics started to have problems, late 19th and early 20th century, so the late 1800s, early 1900s, and scientific measurements got good enough that data were found that could not be explained with classical theories. The problems seem to revolve mostly around things that are very small, like atoms, and very large, like stars and galaxies. And so we're going to take a quick look at some of these. Problem number one is the precession of the orbit of Mercury. Mercury's orbit around the sun precesses, so that's where you see on the picture, right half of the picture, that elliptical part of Mercury's orbit moving, not staying in the same place. All the other planets orbit the sun in exactly the same place. They don't move. What the problem was, well, classic theory predicted a small precession. The observed rate of that precession was far higher than anything that could be predicted by classical physics. Eventually, going forward in time, this problem would be solved by Einstein's general theory of relativity. I wanted to mention that for completeness. And that discussion is outside the scope of today's presentation. Problem number two is known as the missing ultraviolet light, also known as the ultraviolet catastrophe. Classical theory predicted that there would be a continuous spectrum of light emitted from stars with no dark lines in it, and that at the short wavelength end, the ultraviolet end of the spectrum, there would be a nearly infinite amount of energy. Turns out that's not what was happening. The actual spectra does not follow the theoretical model, which you can see down in the picture there with the dotted line arrow pointing to the curve obtained by actual experimentation and measurement. So the missing ultraviolet light, known as the ultraviolet catastrophe, because if the theories were wrong, all of physics would be overturned, leading to chaos, and this would be a catastrophe. And that's pretty much what happened. That brings us up to the first quantum theory. Max Planck in 1900 proposed that he could explain the ultraviolet catastrophe by hypothesizing that when light was transmitted or absorbed, it did so in discrete packets, a finite amount of energy, which he named light quanta. This was a departure from other theories which believed that natural phenomena occurred across a continuum of values. We now refer to light quanta as photons, and you see here the picture of Max Planck as a young physicist and Max Planck as an older physicist, and you see what high-stress physics can do to your hairline. So a really long story presented very quickly. The nature of light now, here's what we observe and know. When light is absorbed and emitted, it behaves primarily with particle-like behavior, in other words, discrete quantities of energy. But while it is being transmitted, light behaves primarily as a wave. And this created a conundrum in physics. How could something be both a particle and a wave? This problem is referred to as wave-particle duality of light, and it's one of the many new questions in physics that arose out of trying to solve the ultraviolet catastrophe questions, and we now have more questions than answers. Now this brings us up to classical physics problem number 3, the spectrum of hydrogen. If we take a vat of pure hydrogen gas and pass light through it, what we expect, and then pass that light through a spectroscope, what we expect to see is a continuum of light. But that's not what we see. What we see is this spectrum on the right, which has many, many dark lines running through it. And the problem became, how can this possibly be happening? Hydrogen is the simplest atom, just one proton, one proton and one electron. And how could that be producing this very complex spectrum? So the hydrogen spectrum issue remained unsolved until 1913, when Niels Bohr, who was a Danish physicist, proposed that electrons could only exist in specific discrete orbits around the atomic nucleus, rather than any orbit at any distance from the nucleus, and that the spectral lines observed correspond to energetic transfers between these quantized electron orbits. So when an electron orbiting the hydrogen atom absorbed energy, that created a dark line in the spectrum at a very specific frequency. So that was our next quantum theory, the quantized orbit theory, and Bohr won a Nobel Prize for that. If you are wondering, as we get into the next subject, which is relativity, what is relativity? Here we have a really lovely picture, which I found on the internet. I have no idea who should be credited with having taken this picture. I'm guessing it's in Europe, but relativity is referring to relative motion in one frame of reference versus the other. So this was obviously taken from the frame of reference of the train car. Everything is in normal focus, but it's a little bit of a time-lapse photograph, and you see the background rushing by. So that's relativity, relative motion. Among his many accomplishments, Albert Einstein came up with the theory of specific relativity and later general relativity, and it's the specific relativity that we care about, and one of the main equations comes out as E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. Not many people really understand what that equation means. And what it means is that matter and energy are equivalent and interchangeable. So why do we care? Well, we're about to care. Remember that little problem with light, the wave-particle duality of light, and everybody was so relieved that it only applied to light? Well, Louis de Broglie, a French PhD student at the time, theorized that if light waves could have particle-like behavior, then electrons, which are particles, should have wave-like behavior. He had no prior work to draw on or build upon. This came right out of his own little brain. After the recommendation of Albert Einstein, he later won a Nobel Prize in physics for this theory of electron waves. So he wrote out the theories. It was one of the shortest PhD theses to be improved ever. And just like that, somebody else ran an experiment with electron beams and found that electrons too underwent diffraction and interference, which are some of the classic behaviors of waves. And therefore electrons were in fact both particles and waves. And so now, fast forward in time, not only for light and electrons, but all known subatomic particles are both particles and waves. So that annoying problem we didn't understand back then is now an annoying problem we still don't fully understand today. So a physicist named Erwin Schrödinger was highly influenced by de Broglie's particle waves, and he went back and reevaluated the Bohr model as a standing wave phenomenon, so that the reason you couldn't have an electron at any old distance, but only at specific ones, had to do with that electron being actually a standing wave around the nucleus. He introduced the math for what is now referred to as wave mechanics, and he proved that probability plays a significant role in how physical matter exists and interacts. And he too won a Nobel Prize, I believe. So as time went on, from roughly 1897 to 1927, the so-called 30 years that shook physics, and George Gamow wrote a book by that title, we came out with a new model of matter and quantum mechanics and relativity. And when all that dust settles, the physicists realized they needed that in order for the universe to actually work and be stable, two more fundamental forces were indicated: the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force. They are not going to be discussed any further in this presentation. I am mentioning them for completeness. Lots of books, and I think I have a few that I can recommend if you want to go into this in more depth. So a scientist named Nikola Tesla said, if you wish to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And Nikola Tesla is the individual that when somebody asked Einstein, Albert Einstein, what it felt like to be the smartest person in the world, he says, I don't know. You need to go ask Nikola Tesla that question. So the man that Einstein acknowledged as the smartest man in the world at that time said, if you want to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And that sounds an awful lot like that ancient scientific text I mentioned, the Kabbalion, which says, nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. So this is now starting to get closer to what we need to understand from all this physics information for energy medicine. So Richard Feynman and a few others said, well, if both relativity and quantum mechanics are true, and if both are happening at the same time, what happens when we combine these isolated theories? Long story short, quantum field theory. And Feynman and a couple other people won a Nobel Prize for quantum field theory, which says there exists an infinite field of potential energy permeating the entire universe. It exists simultaneously everywhere. This photo, of course, is Feynman, and we'll come back to this momentarily. Now we are up to talking about the quantum field and chi. So the world of modern physics, the quantum field is seen as a fundamental description of the background energy of the universe. Quantum field theory definition of matter says matter or particles consist of temporary local interactions between different fields. Particles, the matter, are only temporary and are created and destroyed continuously as they interact. When destroyed, particles dissipate back into the quantum field. Now, interestingly, the world of Chinese medicine, which might be the most complete, well-documented system of Asian energy medicine, that's the source of most of our understanding about modern energy medicine. And it says qi is viewed as the underlying form of energy permeating the universe. Matter consists of temporary local condensations of energy created by interactions of waves of qi. Qi temporarily condenses into matter, and then matter cycles back into qi. So in other words, the quantum field of modern physics and the qi field of energy medicine are the same thing. Modern physics has provided a sound theoretical and functional basis for energy healing. Before moving on into the depths of energy medicine, I wanted to go over this real quick summary of modern physics. We have classical mechanics, relativistic mechanics, quantum mechanics, and quantum field theory. So classical mechanics are big things going slow. Relativistic mechanics applies to big things going fast. Quantum mechanics applies to small things going slow, and quantum field theory applies to small things going really fast. So if you ever get confused, just remember this chart and you will amaze your friends at parties. Now we are up to talking about the practical side of energy medicine. As I mentioned at the start of this presentation, the world of conventional academia and modern biomedicine are strongly resistant to energy medicine, which has caused an uphill battle for most alternative healing systems that use some form of energy medicine. Energy medicine as a broad field, however, is far older and has much longer and stronger, i.e. more successful track record than most aspects of modern conventional medicine. I'm saying that flat out. Energy healing is documented in historical and archaeological records for several thousand years. So, regarding a serious approach to energy healing, energy medicine, energy healing requires the practitioner to be able to consciously draw energy from the background field, to generate energy or raw power at frequencies compatible with the body's energy field and or meridian system, to add in a healing intent, in other words, specific data and instructions to direct the body's innate healing ability to take specific actions. This all involves quantum field energies and something we did not have time to get into called electric scalar potentials. The practitioner also needs to be able to direct this energy and information to the desired organs and tissues of the physical body, as well as the higher frequency energy body. Sometimes the work needs to be done on the energy body and not the physical body. And you definitely need to be a student of both energy and a student of physics and keep expanding your knowledge base. There are different systems of energy healing available. There's lots of them, probably too many. Learn and master one system first, then branch out and add others. That's what I did. I started with Chinese medicine and Qi and acupuncture first, and then I've added several others. And some of the ones I've added are much stronger than the basics of Chinese medicine. The basic skills most systems begin with in training are being able to sense energy fields in yourself, learning to move energy in yourself, and gradually increase your ability to sense, move, and store energy and draw from the background field, learning to sense the energy of others, i.e. your healing client, and learn to move the energy to the desired way and locations in your healing client. In an energy healing session, we start with evaluation. This is no different than any other system of medicine. We evaluate the client using information tell us and then use energetics to diagnose further information. We assess the strength of their overall fields, energy flow in the meridians, the strength of energy in their chakras, their organs, and so forth. We're looking for blockages to qi flow, leakages, excesses, deficiencies, or other impediments to the proper functioning of the energetic anatomy. Whereas an acupuncturist uses needles inserted into the body at acupoints on the meridians, it is not required to do so to move energy in the body. In general, energy medicine practitioners use their field to directly move the energy in the client's fields, meridians, and chakras. So that is a good overview of a scientific and physics-based approach to the concepts of energy medicine and energy healing. If you have any questions, please contact us. The last slide will have our contact information. And we're always open to questions, and if you require further instructions, we can make arrangements to give you custom one-on-one instruction. People have often asked me where do they start if they want to read more about this information. They ask me, when is my book coming out? My Physics of Energy Healing book is third in line right now. I have 2 other books ahead of it that I am in fact working on. One of them is about 90% done that I'm working diligently on. So here's some recommended reading. The Dancy Wu Li Masters is kind of a right-brained approach to quantum physics. The Tao of Physics is kind of a more left-brained approach to looking at physics and relationship to Oriental philosophy. Some of the classics, the all-time classics, is Vibrational Medicine by Richard Gerber. The Body Electric is an excellent one. Energy Medicine, the Scientific Basis is by James Oshman. That is a much more advanced book. I mentioned this earlier in this video, George Gamov's 30 Years That Shook Physics. I highly recommend it. James Glick wrote a book called Chaos, The Making of a New Science, which goes into chaos theory, which also affects energy healing. And if you really want to get into the basics of just physics, you want to know more about vibrations and wavelengths and so forth, voltage and current, grab a copy of Isaac Asimov's book, Understanding Physics. When I used to teach college physics at the junior college level, I was teaching a class of physics for non-science majors. And this is the book I adopted as a textbook. I told everyone that the so-called required textbook, which I wasn't real fond of, was optional, and most students took it back and bought one of these. They're widely available on the used book markets. I believe it's out of print. It was originally published, Understanding Physics, as 3 volumes. It's since been republished in 1 volume, a big fat hardback, and I think it may have a paperback of it. So here's where you start. This will be enough light reading for you for at least a year of, if you spend a couple hours a day or even half hour a day reading some of this material, and your energy medicine skills will go up. As promised, here is my contact information, the Dr. Cage Wellness Clinic, www.drcagewellness.org, phone number. Do give me a call if you have questions, if you want to set up individual courses on energy medicine training or energy medicine treatments. I do provide those, and if there's physics that says that's why distance healing works.